You're watching Fugitive Red-Eye, and welcome to another Top 10 video. And in this one, I'm doing a follow-up to my Top 10 underrated games of all time. Now, I'm trying not to have any duplicates from the previous version here. This isn't a new version, it is a follow-up. But there is one notable exception because it's included for an entirely different reason, because my opinions have shifted. The order is also a lot less defined this time, as is the criteria for underrated. Some of these things do have a decent cult following, but there are quite a few on here that are actually not very well known, so it's not that they're hated, they're just overlooked. So without further ado, let's just jump right into it. So at number 10, we have Mortal Kombat vs. DC Universe. Now this is a classic Mortal Kombat game. I think it's Mortal Kombat 8 technically, because Armageddon was 7 and then there was 9. And this was between that, even though it's not canon. Although it does definitely feel like an in-between between Armageddon and 9. Because the aesthetic and the gameplay style and mechanics are pretty reminiscent of 9. The rage mechanic, for instance, was introduced in this, which would go on to go into 9, and then later on they would have the X-ray mechanic in 10, which is also similar. As I've said, 9, I think, is the last truly great Mortal Kombat, but this is a decent one that I do feel like gets overlooked in the modern age. Probably because it is T-rated, so it's a lot less violent than any of the other Mortal Kombat games. It's the only one that's not M-rated. I don't know that it's necessarily super hated, but it's definitely one of the overlooked Mortal Kombat games that I don't think gets a lot of recognition, even though it did establish a lot of things that would go on to become staples after it. It is also a standout because, you know, it is a crossover game, and it does have a cool final boss in Dark Khan. I really wish there was a way you could unlock him in that game, because he's a really cool villain. This is also a game that got fucking laser burn on my old original copy at one point, because my 360 was standing straight up and fell over. Not that that's super relevant to this ranking, but it was interesting to bring up, so I thought I'd bring it up as a fun tidbit. Alright, moving on to number 9, we have The Legend of Dragoon. Now, the only reason this is ranked at number 9 and not higher is because I do think it actually has a pretty sizable cult following, and anyone who's played it does typically like it. I did a review of this game on the channel and have been doing a playthrough on stream as well, but it's a PS1 JRPG that was made to compete with like Final Fantasy VII and games like that at the time. But it just didn't sell very well, it didn't really get the greatest reviews, it was very overlooked at the time, and it was going to have actually a whole franchise, but that got entirely scrapped because it flopped. Like I said, it did get a re-release on PS4 and has picked up a cult following, so people do like it now. But it is a game that time has overlooked and, you know, almost forgot. But like I said, it did have a resurgence, so at least there's that, and that's why it's only number 10. It is a fun JRPG with some interesting fighting mechanics like additions, and a pretty fun cast of characters and some pretty cool pre-made cutscenes that are really nice. So overall, it's a fun game. I did already review it on the channel. So you can always go check that out if you want more opinions on the game itself, but it is a fun one. Alright, next up we have Berserk and the Millennium Falcon for PS2. Now, this game is liked by those who have played it, which is why it's not ranked higher. Again, the order on this list actually isn't definitive, so don't read too much into the order for the most part. Like, there is a method to the madness, but it is less precise than the first time around. As I said, people do like this game, but the reason it's on this list is because not a ton of people talk about it. And it was never released outside of Japan. It's an awesome PS2 game that takes place in some of the later volumes of Berserk, adapting portions of the Millennium Falcon arc. There were also portions of the same arc adapted in the Dreamcast game, sort of the Berserk Guts' Rage. But this also adds in some unique, like, ghost stuff that's exclusive to the game that's really fun. I won't spoil it, but there is some really cool stuff with that. You do also get some cool abilities and supports from your teammates. So it is a really cool, overlooked Berserk game. And out of the Berserk games I've played, it's probably my favorite. I do like Band of the Hawk on PS4 as well, but I do think that Millennium Falcon is a lot cooler of a game. I have a fan-translated copy. I also do have an original Japanese copy, and I have currently been streaming through it. There's a cool level-up system as well. It's just overall a really good Berserk game. It does have a ton of enemies in it, and sometimes it can be a little repetitive with the combat, but I do think it mixes it up enough with enemy variety, cool boss battles, and fun cutscenes that it is definitely a great Berserk game. And I just wish we got it in the US. It would have been a great game to have on PS2 back in the day. die. Alright, next up we have Postal 1. Now, obviously this game is popular with those who have played it, which is, again, why it's not higher on the list. Again, the ranking isn't as important on this one. But Postal 1 is on this list for the sheer fact that it is absolutely overshadowed by Postal 2. Postal 1 is an entirely different game from Postal 2, whereas Postal 2 is a first-person shooter game with, like, a very offensive, over-the-top sense of humor. Postal 1 is a dark, almost horror-like game where you play as an insane protagonist and the whole goal is to kill people. Postal 1 is very different than the rest of the series, so it is a standout that I do think a lot of fans haven't experienced. There are a lot that have, especially with the remake Postal Redux on PS4, which is a perfectly fine way to play the game. But Postal 1, I do think, did deserve to be mentioned on this list because, again, it is overshadowed by the rest of the franchise. Alright, next up we have Devilman on PS1. This is a game that I'm still currently playing through, but it is a really cool game that also was not released outside of Japan and is overlooked by a lot of people. Devilman on the PS1 has 3 stages. The first stage, which is the first half of the game, basically, is a survival horror game, kind of akin to things like Resident Evil, Silent Hill, Dino Crisis, with tank controls to go with it. That part is really cool and atmospheric with the exploring you do. It is definitely frustrating at times. Stage 2 is a beat-em-up, and also kind of a fighter, where you fight different demons because you're Devilman at that point, whereas in the first part you're just a Kirafudo. And that part's really cool as well and has unique bosses to it. And then Stage 3, one thing that's a little annoying is you don't unlock Stage 3 unless you get an A rank on Stage 1 and 2. And Stage 3 is just one boss battle. It's the final boss battle, which is Siren. But then there's also bonus mode, where it's the TV version, and it has several differences to be more in line with the 70s anime of Devilman, which again is also a bit difficult to unlock, so there are some things that are a little annoying about it. But the game itself is really fun, the fighting sections are particularly fun, and it's a great adaptation of Devilman with its own unique take on certain things, and some scenes are done kind of differently. So there is a lot of fun stuff to it, and it is a really good survival horror and beat-em-up game. Speaking of survival horror, the next game on the list is Call of Cthulhu: Dark Corners of the Earth. Again, those that play it tend to like this game, but it is also very much overlooked. It was made by Bethesda, and it has really fucking good graphics for 2005. It's also an adaptation of H.P. Lovecraft's The Shadow over Innsmouth, which is my favorite Lovecraft story. It can be difficult at times. There are limited ammo and health resources, and there are some interesting puzzles that you definitely have to use your brain to solve. You do get a good set of weapons as well to deal with enemies. Obviously, your ammo is limited, and you don't want to reload until your magazine is empty, because you'll just toss away the extra bullets that are in that other magazine, so it doesn't work quite like weapons do in modern games. So it is a little bit more risky if you're reloading without knowing exactly how much you've drained, and there's not like a HUD or anything to tell you. There's also a cool sanity meter that you, if you start to go insane, can fuck you up in addition to your health meter. It's really good if you're a fan of H.P. Lovecraft, and it's easily like one of my favorite adaptations of one of his works. And of course I reference it all the time. There's the "I'm gonna fucking die here" Jack quote, which I finally got to on stream and still need to make a highlight of, because I was referencing it long before I got there in the playthrough, because I played through a good chunk of it before. I've been all the way to Devil's Reef in my first playthrough, but I've never actually beat the game. My current playthrough I'm pretty far, so hopefully we'll get that dealt with and actually get back to it at some point. But yeah, it's a great game. Alright, next up we have Gantz the Game on PS2, which is another one I've done a playthrough of on the channel. And again, it's one that I don't think is necessarily hated, but it is overlooked because it is Japan exclusive, and I don't think most people know about it. But it adapts like the first 3 arcs of Gantz, plus a little bit of the 4th, because it has up to the chibi aliens, and it also has the vampires in it. But that's about as far as it goes, but it is a third-person shooter that also has role-playing elements and multiple endings. On my first playthrough, I actually got the best ending where I kept everyone alive because there is permadeath for your party members if they die. And once you beat the main game mode, you unlock another mode where you can play as any of the characters, even the dog, Rice, which is how I started my Nishi playthrough, which I've yet to finish. I have done the main game, but I am currently doing the Nishi playthrough. And then there's another mode you unlock after that I don't know too much about. It says Neko Mimi mode on any fucking guide I look up, but I've never seen any footage of it or anything, so I don't know. But you have to beat the bonus game to unlock that, so I have to beat it with Nishi. But nevertheless, the Gantz the Game is a really fun game. I just mashed through the RPG elements, the dialogue and stuff like that, which was interesting because I had no idea what it said because it's all in Japanese. But nevertheless, I still somehow managed to pull off the best ending. But again, if you like Gantz, it's a really good game and it's a lot of fun. It also has a pretty good soundtrack as well. Alright, now we're on to the top 3, which is actually games that are kind of hated. So we're finally getting to that, which is what mostly the first list was. So at number 3, we have Fable 3. Now, Fable 3 is definitely a massive step down from Fables 1 and 2. But I don't think it deserves the hate it gets. Yes, it does dumb down a lot of the role-playing elements. Yes, the level system is inferior. But it still has several of the core mechanics, and it does have recurring characters like Reaver, who I fucking love. Reaver's great. And it does have a really good story as well. And so Fable 3 I do think is unfairly maligned. I do think it is a really fun Fable game. I definitely think Fable 2 is better, as is Fable 1. But I've never beat Fable 1. I have beat Fable 3 twice, and I've beat Fable 2 multiple times. So Fable 3 I do think does get an unfair shake. It is a fun game. It is a lot more industrialized than Fable 1 and 2, because that's kind of the point, right? Because history is progressing throughout the games. But Fable 3, it is still a lot of fun, even if it does dumb down the mechanics quite a bit and has kind of a shit leveling system, admittedly. But I do still enjoy Fable 3 a lot. Alright, at number 10 we have Friday the 13th on NES. Now this is also a game I included in my top 10 NES games. It is a game that gets a ton of hate, and has even had an AVGN episode on it. Now Friday the 13th on NES definitely is not without its faults, and it is also very frustrating and difficult in many ways. For instance, the game straight up lies to you about your objective. It tells you have to light all the fireplaces. The guides also lie to you and say similar things, like how to get the torch is also incorrect. There's many different things that are incorrect in what the game and the official guide tell you, so that is kind of bullshit. But the game is really ambitious for an NES game. Because it's relatively open world. It's got an exploration element to it. And it is also, I think, the correct way to do a Friday the 13th game, because the only thing you have to do to win the game is kill Jason. You just have to kill Jason 3 times. Now, that's easier said than done, because he has a massive health bar, but nevertheless, it is possible. Now, granted, when I beat the game, I was cheating and made myself invincible, so I haven't, legitimately fairly beat it. But it is possible. Each of the counselors you can play as also have unique stats, and it does behoove you to try and keep as many people alive as possible in case you lose, because the amount of counselors you have is the amount of lives you have, essentially. Some people are under the misconception you have to keep all of the children alive. You can let a few of them die, but you definitely want to keep as many alive as possible, because as soon as they reach 0, you lose. Basically, you want to try to get the machete, the pitchfork, or the torch, and then just take on Jason as soon as you can. It's easier to take him out outside the cabins than inside the cabins, because inside the cabins there's the punch-out minigame, whereas outside you just gotta jump to dodge his attacks. Like I said, I did include in my top 10 NES video, so I have already talked about at length why I do like this game. But I do think, again, it is the correct way to do a Friday the 13th game, unlike the PS4 game, which I didn't care for. I also really like the aesthetic of it, with the woods, the caves, the cabin, and the lake. Admittedly, some of the navigation of the cabins can be kind of janky, but I do still like the aesthetic quite a bit. Anyway, that's it for that one. Now we're on to number 1, which is the one that is coming back from the first list, and that's YIIK, a Postmodern RPG, also known as YIIK. I've talked about YIIK in so many videos on the channel at this point, and I've also done quite a lot of playthroughs because I was the first person to get to level 999 without using save editing. Although I did use dev mode on the last 5 playthroughs, so then there was someone who did it without even using dev mode, so that's pretty cool, because dev mode lets you fast forward the game and skip battles and stuff like that. But part of the reason I'm putting it on the list again is in the previous version, I was under the misconception that I found the game to be a guilty pleasure, and I was going on the, oh, kind of so bad it's good kind of thing, when actually later on I just realized, no, I just legitimately like the game, and had been primed by a lot of the video essays I saw, and taking things at face value that weren't meant to be taken at face value. Because Y2K has an unreliable narrator. Alex is telling you stuff that isn't necessarily what's happening. And that's the mistake a lot of people make with the game, is they notice the flaws in his story, which they view as just bad writing and inconsistencies, but they're there by design. There's been revisions to parts of the games with, the 1.25 release, and then of course 1.5 or IV, which we'll talk a little bit more about in a minute. Even with those revisions, they did leave in those intentional inconsistencies that are supposed to poke holes in the story that Alex is presenting you. Hence, it's a postmodern RPG. But a lot of people took everything at face value anyway and then said, oh, it's not postmodern, because all the postmodern elements went over their heads. I fell in love with the game for real during 1.25, which, to be fair, is the only version of the game I had played at the time. I never played 1.0. I have obviously played 1.5 as well now, and I did a review of 1.5 pointing out that 1.5 is actually one of my favorite RPGs now. But yeah, the story you're presented is already pretty interesting with the concepts like soul survivors, the soul space, and all of the different stuff in the story is already great. But the fact that a lot of it is, you know, psychological, postmodern shit, and a lot of it is probably just Alex, like, coping with, you know, him fucking up a lot of his own life and relationships, is also kind of Silent Hill-like, which I know might be a weird comparison, but Silent Hill is all about the character's psyche, and things in Silent Hill represent sort of their inner demons. YIIK is sort of kind of doing something similar to that, obviously not to the same degree and not exactly the same thing, but a lot of what Alex is presenting you in the game is like a bullshit version of the story to try and cope with what actually may or may not have happened. And then 1.5 adds on an extra layer with Michael altering the story, which is pretty interesting too. Which is why it's interesting that in a way all previous versions seem to be canon, or at least that's the theory I'm going with. Doing New Game Plus and such just sort of descend Alex further and further into his delusions. Now 1.5 completely overhauled the game, added on a free sequel to the end of it, and also added in a bunch of extra sections with a new character named the Nameless Child, which makes it fucking great. There were initially some bugs in it in the PS4 version when it first launched. Most of those have been fixed. Old combat now works, which you can only really access with New Game Double Plus, and all of the crashes seem to have been resolved. I've been able to actually play the game properly, with the few cutscenes that consistently crash no longer crashing. The game also restores the old PAX demo where you go down to Cape Juno and you get Wilfred as a party member. Like, it has a bunch of additional content in 1.5, or IV as it's also called. And, like, legitimately, if you played YIIK before and you didn't like it, try it again because the mechanics are entirely different. 1.5 entirely changes the combat, scrapping the mini-games in favor of more traditional RPG combat, but with a new flair with the Carta system affecting your stats and abilities and stuff like that. And each of them also having their own unique ability, whether you're holding them or if you use them. The game also has a phenomenal soundtrack, which has always been the case, and in fact it adds like 100 more songs to 1.5 as well. And the game itself just feels a lot more complete since 1.5's release as well. Like I said, during 1.25, during my New Game Plus runs, I fell in love with the game for real and realized that I really loved it, especially watching Hellcry's videos and coming to realize the unreliable narrator portion, and also the fact that I'd obviously been primed by a lot of the video essays, which is the whole reason I bought it in the first place. That's the one positive to come from those bad video essays, is it got me curious about the game enough to buy it, and then eventually it became one of my favorite games, so I'm glad I did. But yeah, I felt that YIIK was worth putting at number 1 on this list, because number 1, it's hated by a lot of people because of bad video essays that took things at face value. But also number 2, because it's a completely different game now with the 1.5 update that overhauled it. So YIIK is fucking great, and if you haven't played it, check it out. Anyway, that's Volume 2 of my underrated games of all time. I might be doing a Volume 3, where some of the members of Team Red Eye, and even some of you in the audience, if you want to submit a game that you think is underrated, and also give me a reason, because if I haven't played it, I can't really talk about it unless you give me your reasoning. Because I might have some of the members of Team Red Eye talk about some of their favorite underrated games. But I hope this top 10 list was enjoyable to you guys, and have a good one. Toodles!
I'm a bit of an elbow man myself, actually. Bit different, bit weird, not sexual.
I'm gonna fucking die here, Jack!
Subscribe to Fugitive Red Eye.